Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. To gain that understanding, I am mining the intersection of psychology, theology, and philosophy to make you a better writer. This is episode 138, the full story of the Zettelkasten Index. The full story of the Zettelkasten Index has three parts to it. Now, it's all going to be in one video, but there are three aspects to the Zettelkasten Index that we need to talk about for a full understanding of what's going on with the Zettelkasten Index. Over here in my Zettelkasten, this big box, this half of this first drawer here is all my Zettelkasten Index. And I'm going to give you all of the secrets of how I put things into it and how I use it. The first part is going to be how we use the Zettelkasten Index. And I'm starting with how we use it rather than how we write to it, because the way that we're going to use it is going to guide how we want to write to it. When we write to the index, we are being kind to our future self who is going to use the index. So let's see how a well-crafted index can be so useful when we're ready to do a lookup. So how we use it is going to come first. Then, knowing how we use it, the second part of this video is going to be how we write to it. What are we going to do to create excellent index entries for our new card? And then the final section is going to be about tricks and tips. What happens, for example, when some of your index gets ridiculously large? And here I'm referring to, say, for example, the letter S or the letter C or P. They were kind of surprising, the C and the P ones for me, but S wasn't surprising, that it got so big that it was just cumbersome to try to look anything up, and I had to use subdivider cards. So that's what the third section is going to be about, subdivider cards. And Amy, I'm going to talk about the symbology that I use when I write on the Zettelkasten. You've been wanting me to talk about all the symbols that I use. Well, today I'm going to talk about all the symbols that I use on index cards. And there's a couple more that go on name cards that I'll cover. You've actually seen in different podcasts, but at some point I'll just do a whole podcast just on symbols. But today you'll see the ones in the last part. You'll see in index tips and tricks. You'll see some of the symbols that I use. Okay, so let's get started with an introduction to what is it that you do when you have a main card in your hand and you're trying to place it. So we're going to, I'm going to give you an example. And we're going to talk from that example. So let's get started with that. Okay, here we go. Here's our new card that we're going to be adding to our Zettelkasten. It's a quote from Ken Cabuto that he told me about in a Zoom call, a Zoom meeting with him. And it's a saying that he often uses: don't add energy to an unstable system. Well, when I heard that quote, it immediately made me think of the book that I'm reading rather deeply, the Peterson and Seligman Character, Strengths, and Virtues. And what occurred to me is that the system that they are using, they lament the lack of a taxonomy. And I believe that the lack of a taxonomy results in their having an unstable system. The energy that they're adding is they're adding measurements, they're adding instruments and criteria for inclusion and exclusion. And it occurs to me that when you're adding energy and measurements, especially to an unstable system, you're not going to get the results that you're going to hope to get By the way, here's my reference to Peterson and Seligman. And let's take a look at what I mean, because see the star up here? That indicates that there's information on the back side of this card. Most main cards do not have information on the back, but if you do have information on the back, that's what that star means. Okay, so then when I turn the card over, here's what I mean, and I don't want to go into too much detail because it's a little bit technical. If you go into categorical data analysis, which is the field that I was in when I was working in psychology, you're going to be having your test groups, and you're going to be applying an effect to your test groups. If your test groups are not properly segregated by type, then when you apply your test force, if they're jumbled, the force that you apply is going to affect each of the groups equally, and you're not going to see the effect that you desire. Whereas if you've got your taxonomy correctly defined and you've got your groups properly separated, then when you apply your force, the group that it applies to will immediately show an effect and the others won't. So that from a psychological measurement perspective, you really want to get your taxonomy correct. So it's a little bit of a technical card, but we're not focusing on the technicality here. What we're focusing on is how we're going to place this card. How are we going to use our index to determine where this card goes? So I want to show you some symbology, Amy, besides the star. I use this double slash line. It's in green here, and I tend to usually do them in green, but it doesn't matter. That signals to me the line that I'm going to use as my tag line in my index. And a tag line is the line that I believe best characterizes the content of this card, because my tag line is what's going to go into my index, and we'll see those in just a very, very short minute. Besides that double bar indicating a tag line, I also underline the words that I consider to be keywords in the tagline, because I will index. Ultimately, I will be indexing each one of those words. And I have two taglines because part of it is the basic quote from Ken Caputo, which is interesting enough in itself. But the other part is my reflection on it, which has to do with the usability of a system that lacks a taxonomy. Now, this card does not have a number yet. I cannot index this card because it has no number, and an index tells you where to find a card by card number. But that tagline and those underlying variables are of supreme importance for me, because those are the very key words that I'm going to use to look up in my index to see, where does this card go? What card number does it need? Where does it belong in my Zettelkasten? So the first underlined word is energy. So I'm going to go to the E's in my index. And I like to pull out all of my E's. These are all of my letter E's. Now, I have a practice. When a word appears 3 or more times in my index under the general letter E, it gets promoted to a card of its own. When it gets promoted to a card of its own, I underline it and I make this symbol here to tell me that if you're looking for elements, pull the card elements. If you're looking, and well, there's 2 of them right there. If you're looking for explanations, pull the card explanations. If you're looking for the word eyes, pull the card that has the word eyes. So that just tells me don't bother looking in my general letter E's. So my first step, since I'm looking for the word energy, I will always begin by saying, is energy there by itself as a word by itself? No, it isn't. But at this moment, what I'm going to be doing is looking up all of my letter E cards to see if I can find the word energy, because I know my energy, if I've got it, it's in these cards and it's not in a card with the word all by itself. And indeed, I find energy. It's way back here on my last letter, general letter E card, my 8th general letter E card. Another piece of symbology, if I've got more cards, I put a plus sign so that when I got down to card 7 and I still needed to make a new one, I put a plus sign, and 8 doesn't have a plus sign, and it's also got spare room. So that's my end of my E's. But way down there on the end of my E's, I finally found a reference to energy. And it's a rather interesting one. And you can see this is the tagline from the card. When I indexed the card at 3B, 2A, 3B, 4D, 3A2, it had tagline, energy from an off-index connection. I know, because I've got that whole line there, I know that that is not the kind of energy that we're talking about in the King Caboodle quote. But boy, is it an interesting one, because it's almost related. Think about it. An index connection, that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking for an index connection. Isn't that interesting? We found an index connection, but it's not quite the one we want. But boy, was that ever interesting. Kind of gives us a little pop of energy, doesn't it? That's exactly what that card is telling us. Energy from an off-index connection. Oh well, but it's not the energy that we're looking for. So now we're going to look for unstable, and there was nothing in our system to go with unstable. So the next word up was system. Well, it turns out that system does have a card all of its own. And not only that, as I indicated, S's are so big that there's multiple cards. They're broken down. So, system is in a word card all by itself. So now I have some exciting cards to take a look at to see if I have, do I have what I need here, what I'm looking for? And what I see is a Zettelkasten is a communication system. Not that kind of system. A Zettelkasten friction-free numbering system. Ooh, that kind of sounds like the effortless numbering system we've been working on. Interesting, but it's an off connection. Okay, how about organization systems? Well, not really the kind of system we're looking for. So basically, by the time we're done with looking all of the keywords in this tagline, we don't find anything that tells us where we want to put our card. So, done with that, now we'll come down to the next tagline. For our next tagline, our keywords we identified were unstable, lack, taxonomy. And unstable doesn't turn out to have anything, nor does lack, but taxonomy does. Taxonomy turns out to be a rather rich card for us. And now with this card, our challenge is going to be a little bit different. Here, our challenge is going to be picking which one of all of these possible connections might be the very one that we need for placing our card. Now, because we have so much richness here, because we have a tagline to go with every reference, we can quickly look through these things and saying, there's two of these that look pretty interesting. Damage by lack of a taxonomy. Ooh, lack of a taxonomy. A missing taxonomy leads to trite and unconvincing findings. We've narrowed it down to two cards that we think are potentially the parent card for our card. So now the next thing that we're going to need to do is jot down these two card numbers and then go pull those cards and see which one gives us our best match. So I'll be back in a jiff when I pull those two cards. Okay, when I had my index card out, I jotted down the two numbers that were the closest to the card that I'm looking for. I might have in the real world, I might have pulled several of these cards to get the best match, but to keep things simple, I'm just pulling two. And here are the two cards. This one is further talking about the idea that the lack of a taxonomy can cause at least as much damage as an errant one, which is very, very closely allied to my card about not adding energy to an unstable system, but doesn't add too much to it. Rather more interesting, I felt, is taking a look at this card 4B1B-1, which was taken from the Peterson and Seligman book, and their comments on pages 5 and 6 of their book, where they lament that they're missing taxonomy, that they have worries about it. They say that it might lead to trite findings, or they might even sound unconvincing, like bad evangelists convincing no one. So they say that they think the problem is that they have a missing underlying theory, and that the taxonomy could provide the underlying theory. To me, that's a more interesting match, because my belief is, and this is my idea added to a card, it was already, see, this card has their thought and my thought on it was that they're correct, that the answer is that the struggle is the missing dynamic. And I felt that our new card, since it was talking about adding energy to an unstable system, that it was really much more closely related to what they themselves were lamenting. And so I have made the choice that this card is going to be my parent card. Now that we know where this card goes, we're going to put this card into our system. So that will be the next one that we talk about. Okay, here we're picking up the story. This is the parent card that we chose to use to match with our new card. And I did check, and there was no 4B1B-1A in existence. So there was no other child. So our new card was able to simply be 4B1B-1A. And that's just using the effortless numbering system that I've covered already. So now what remains is to make the index entries that go into the index. I went ahead, because it wasn't completely obvious what was going to go into be my tagline in the index, so I wrote them across the top just for clarity. And the first one was don't add energy to an unstable system. And the next one was a reference to the Peterson and Seligman book. And then that tagline, an unstable system lacks a taxonomy. Now the underlined words, emergence, energy, unstable, and system would be indexed, as well as here, unstable system and taxonomy. I chose not to index lacks because I thought to myself, well, lacks, needs, missing, I'd be playing a guessing game in any case to try to use that word. So in this one, I'm just indexing unstable system and taxonomy. Now I'll show you how these turn out in the index itself. Here's the entry for energy. Here's the card number, 4B1B-1A. Don't add energy to an unstable system. You see I've included the entire tagline, and here I've underlined the E because this is going on a general E card. That helps me when I'm trying to find how many references to energy do I already have. Is it time to promote it to a card of its own? I could say, okay, nope, just the two. And I've already looked and there's only those two. But the next time I have an energy, it will get promoted. So the next card that I need was unstable. There was no unstable card, so I had to use my U, general U. And here it is. Don't add energy to an unstable system. But there's an unstable in my next one as well. So I put the other tagline in at the same time. Peterson and Seligman, Character, Strengths, and Virtues. Unstable system lacks taxonomy. So then in our same first one, the next keyword was system. Here's our system card that had it was already isolated on its own index card. Here's our new entry. Don't add energy to an unstable system. But the second tagline also has system in it. Peterson and Seligman, unstable system lacks taxonomy. So I did both of them at the same time. Now, because system is a card that has the entire word, and underline the entire word. And finally, there was only one entry left to make because unstable and system were already present. I only needed to add taxonomy. And here's the taxonomy card. Again, there was already a card for taxonomy, and here's the new entry at the bottom of taxonomy. Those long taglines on the index turn out to be enormously valuable. When you're going to look up a reference, you have that entire line that just completely brings back the card. When I see that line, I don't just think of the tagline, I think of everything that was present on that card that I just added to my system. It brings the whole thing back to me, and it makes the idea blossom back in my mind just fully complete. And it's very exciting because that means that even when I'm just searching for something in an index, I get all of these flashes of insights that were previous moments in time where I had an idea from a reference. I added my own thoughts and feelings to it and ended up with a wonderful addition to my Zettelkasten. And now I'm going to be on the lookout here for how this taxonomy thing plays out, because I think it's going to turn out to be enormously important. I think that Peterson and Seligman are making a fundamental mistake when they focus totally on the positives, character, strengths, and virtues. It's like focusing only on wealth. If you want to know how to become successful, you really need to know the entire path. How do you get from where you were to where you want to be in terms of character, strengths, and virtues? And not just how good is life once you've got them. Well, of course, hopefully that is a given. So that is the power of an index. An index works when you're trying to figure out where to place your card. You're going to look up the relevant cards using your index. And then when it's time to put your new card index references in, you'll be back in the index creating new entries for it. So that is both sides of adding a new card and how the index gets used for both. There's one more section left in our video, and that is indexing tips and tricks. And we will be up with that in a moment. Okay, our last segment here is on indexing tips and tricks. Now what I'm showing you right here is the letter S. The letter S gets a little carried away with itself. There's so many cards that it became very hard to handle. I generally, when I'm working with an index entry, I like to pull the entire letter at a time, and that makes it, and then just work and flip through the cards for the letter. Well, when it gets so big that it's very painful to try to especially look through the indexes, then it's time to break it up into subgroups. The biggest trick about breaking it up into subgroups is that now your general categories are just for a range of letters, SA to SD. Even so, it still ran to 2 cards. And then from that point on, your individual words, you simply have to divide up appropriately by the alphabet. So the big job is going through all of your cards that start at S1, S2, S3, and break them down into the individual segments. So that's a big job when it's time to do it, but it's a huge time saver once that work is done. What this card simply points out is that I don't have any entries of words that start with X. Surprise, surprise. But I use this as my tips and tricks because I start my index out with every letter of the alphabet starts out with a 1. And then when you fill the card, it gets the next one. So even though X was very unlikely to actually be used and hasn't been used, it still got its card. And it's still the only thing there. Okay. What this card shows is some symbology. And the symbology that I want to point out with this card is predominantly this symbol right here. This one that looks like a square bracket and an arrow. That's the symbolism that I use when a keyword has occurred so many times that now it gets a card of its own. My limit is 3. You can make yours whatever you want. So once it's promoted, instead of just having the letter D underlined, the whole word gets underlined. And then I use that symbol to tell me that go elsewhere to look for that card. Now in the very next line, there's another DSM. There's no symbol out here. The symbol is above the DSM. Why? Well, because there's diagnostic and disorders. There's 2 more D's in that tagline. And therefore, I put the symbol above the one word that's been promoted. Later, when each of these has its own separate line, the whole thing will be marked as promoted. Okay, there's another thing that I want to point out, which are some obsolete symbols. And this is mostly because I promised Amy I would go over all of my symbols. And Amy, you'll be seeing these symbols and wondering, why didn't I tell you about these? Okay, this purple square bracket, that was the symbol that I used to use for a directory card. I think I've told you that I've got about 4 different numbering systems in my box. And in one of my numbering systems, I created directories for the big prefix numbers. And they were just like empty cards that just had the prefix number on them and then a tagline and no information. I don't do that anymore, so this symbol is obsolete for me. This other one in green, quite similar, was for a topic. I don't use topic cards anymore, so that symbol is obsolete. And then this double green line, well, that meant it was a real live main card with real live information. Well, guess what? All of the cards I enter now are real live main cards with real live information. So that symbol I don't use anymore. So the only of all of the symbols you see on this card, the only ones that are still, one that is still in use is this square box and an arrow to indicate a promoted card. But systems grow and evolve, and it's worth showing this to you to let you know that your system can survive growing, evolving, and changing your mind. Okay, here's an example of a card that was created as a promotion. And notice I've got 2 words, build and built. They were so similar that I decided that I would extract them and put them together on one card. Another one down here, another variation, building. And that turns out to sometimes be handy. That's just a practice that I use to cut down on the number of entries in the generalized category, like in the B's here, because you wouldn't have enough to pull them out, but they're all variations of the same word. So I do it that way. Sometimes that turns out to not be the best idea. Live and learn, right? You got to try things out. So I ended up with write, writing, written, and writers all being pulled out to the same cards. And guess what? They're filling up like mad. So at some point, what I'll probably do is break these apart and have single cards for each of the individual words. This card is just kind of a fun card, and the reason I chose to include it, even though there's really no added information here, is I'm doing this so that you can see how many different numbering systems I actually have in my Zettelkasten. Hopefully you can read this, because you'll see the majority of them are the number, letter, number system, which I really like. But here's one, 4920. It's just a raw prefix, and it's a directory. Here's one, 3710.02. It's a prefix and a topic. And I don't use those anymore. Okay, here's one that's a combo. It's a number, letter, and a topic. And here's one that uses the slash system that you would be accustomed to seeing for like a Lumen system or a Scott Shepherd system. And they all live happily in my box. No quarrels are breaking out, and no divisions are happening, and no one is refusing to talk to anyone just because the numbers follow different systems. They can all be filed together and quite happily. This other card with writing writers also shows a part of the reason why I no longer use these directory cards. Look at all of these guys. They really contribute no information at all. They're just directory headers. And I find I don't even look at them when I'm looking for something. I'm looking for a main card that I can link to. So that was part of what convinced me that I don't even really need those directory cards. So there are some tips and tricks, but I also want you to see that your index is your living history of your Zettelkasten. It's a powerful reminder of all the different ways you've done things through the years that you've had it, and it's a marvelous reference. When you have all main cards, each one of these lines will bring back a thought to you. The directories, not so much, which is again another reason why I've stopped doing them. I hope you have enjoyed this comprehensive review of indexes in a Zettelkasten, one of your most powerful tools. Do not neglect your index. The more effort you put into creating your index, the better it will serve you. It is time very, very well spent. And you will find that index can be enormously powerful and can refresh your knowledge so quickly that your mind will just totally be boggled at how valuable and priceless that index is. Yes, it takes some time to make those entries, but it doesn't take as much time as you might think. And boy, on the referencing side, does it ever save time. Because if you think about it, if it just had only keywords or only a tiny one word or two left, you might have to pull a whole lot of cards before you find out exactly where you want to place your new main card. So it's a marvelous time saver when you have that whole tagline. Plus, the ideas just flip through your mind like you're flipping through the main cards themselves. You are just going to love working with your index. And if you have any questions, just drop a comment and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. Thank you for joining me.